Tonight we begin with a development that Treasury officials, Wall Street analysts, and global economists had feared, dismissed, and desperately hoped would never come to pass. A move that unfolded not over months, not over years, but in a single trading session. A single trading session that wiped $400 billion from American markets. A single trading session that sent the dollar tumbling to its lowest point in 18 months. A single trading session that fundamentally altered the balance of global economic power. What China did today crossed a line that Washington had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, America did not have an answer ready. Beijing responded with coordination, with precision, and with a $4 trillion alliance that nobody in the White House saw coming. Ray Dalio, the billionaire founder of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world, issued a warning tonight that stopped traders in their tracks. He said, and I quote, "This is not a drill. This is the beginning of the end of dollar dominance, and America is not prepared." Tonight, we break down exactly what happened, why it happened, and what it means for every American watching. For years now, there had been signals, not official announcements, not formal declarations, just signals that Beijing was preparing something unprecedented. China has been aggressive, yes, but they have been patient in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain logic, a rhythm, almost a predictability. But what set off alarm bells in Washington this week was that the rhythm went silent. Economists who monitor currency flows know the indicators. The gradual reduction of Treasury bond purchases, the quiet accumulation of gold reserves, the expansion of yuan-denominated trade agreements, the sudden acceleration of digital currency development. All of that went quiet. And whenever China goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. For months, Beijing had been holding approximately $850 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds. That number had been declining slowly, $1 billion here, $2 billion there, nothing that would trigger immediate concern. But intelligence analysts noticed something else. They noticed that China had been holding quiet meetings with finance ministers from Japan, South Korea, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore. These weren't the usual diplomatic exchanges. These were closed-door sessions. No press releases, no joint statements, no photo opportunities, just meetings. And then silence. The kind of silence that precedes a storm. Early this morning, currency traders detected what they described as unprecedented coordinated selling pressure, including dollar liquidations that had not been seen in over 2 decades. These are the kinds of moves that China only executes when they are signaling something very specific. A fundamental shift in economic alignment, a rejection of American financial leadership, or the birth of an alternative system. Analysts didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that China was changing posture. And when a $17 trillion economy shifts posture without explanation, even by a fraction of a percentage point, Washington pays attention. What made today different was the scale. At 3:47 a.m. Eastern Time, China's State Administration of Foreign Exchange began liquidating dollar-denominated assets at a rate that exceeded anything in recorded history. Within 90 minutes, they had sold $78 billion worth of Treasury bonds. Within 3 hours, that number reached $142 billion. By the time American markets opened, the damage was already done. But the selling wasn't the story. The story was who was selling alongside them. Japan, America's closest ally in Asia, dumped $34 billion. South Korea offloaded $18 billion. India, Indonesia, and the ASEAN bloc combined for another $47 billion. This wasn't a Chinese attack. This was an Asian exodus. And at the center of it all was a document that Treasury officials are only now beginning to understand: the Shanghai Monetary Framework. The warning issued by Ray Dalio tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Source after source after source described China's move as unprecedented, coordinated, and perhaps most importantly, irreversible. Ray Dalio, speaking from his Connecticut estate, told Bloomberg, "I have been warning about this for 15 years. I wrote about it in my books. I spoke about it at Davos. I told everyone who would listen that the American Empire was following the same arc as the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, and every empire before it. Nobody wanted to hear it. Tonight, they have no choice." Dalio continued, "What China did today was not impulsive. It was not reactive. It was the culmination of a 20-year strategy to build an alternative to American financial hegemony. And today, that alternative went live. But warnings only matter if someone responds. And America's response today was among the most confused, disorganized, and frankly embarrassing we've seen in modern financial history. Here's what we know. Within minutes of the selling beginning, the Federal Reserve attempted emergency liquidity injections. These weren't the normal open market operations. These were crisis-level interventions tools that the Fed only deploys when they are preparing to prevent systemic collapse. They pumped $200 billion into overnight lending markets. It wasn't enough. They announced an emergency swap line expansion with European central banks. It didn't stop the bleeding. They issued a statement saying the dollar remained fundamentally strong. Nobody believed them. Tonight, Reuters confirmed that China launched coordinated actions, targeting dollar infrastructure, including SWIFT transaction volumes that had recently been weaponized against Russia for what analysts believe was a test case for broader de-dollarization. China moved before Washington could respond. They activated SIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, as a primary settlement mechanism. They announced that oil purchases from Saudi Arabia would now be denominated in yuan. They revealed a digital yuan integration with 14 Asian central banks that was already operational. In other words, China targeted the plumbing of American financial power, the infrastructure that would have made dollar dominance permanent. This is what made Dalio's warning so urgent. China's move wasn't just symbolic, it was operational. It represented the kind of shift that could end American economic supremacy if left unchecked. And Washington, caught completely off guard, responded with chaos. Not strategically, not coherently, but chaotically. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen held a press conference that raised more questions than it answered. She didn't announce countermeasures. She didn't reveal a contingency plan. She read a statement that could have been written by an intern and refused to take questions. Meanwhile, the White House issued conflicting statements. The National Security Council said they were monitoring the situation. The State Department said they were in contact with allies. The Commerce Department said they were evaluating options. None of them said anything of substance. And while Washington fumbled, Beijing executed. And here's where the story becomes even more alarming. Intelligence analysts now believe that China's latest move was designed to test the coherence of American leadership after years of political division and institutional dysfunction. Beijing wanted to see whether Washington would freeze. And today, Washington froze. The Federal Reserve didn't coordinate with Treasury. Treasury didn't coordinate with the White House. The White House didn't coordinate with Congress. Everyone was caught off guard. Everyone was reading from a different script. Everyone was pointing fingers instead of solving problems. And China noticed. You don't get Beijing's attention easily. But today, American dysfunction got their attention. Economic strategists speaking with the Financial Times under anonymity described China's shift as the Great Decoupling, a way to insulate the Chinese economy from American financial weapons while building an alternative system for the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is listening. What made today so devastating wasn't just what China did. It was who joined them. Japan, the third largest economy on Earth, chose Beijing over Washington. South Korea, a treaty ally with 28,000 American troops on its soil, chose Beijing over Washington. India, the democracy we've been courting for decades, chose Beijing over Washington. These nations looked at America. They looked at our political chaos, our debt ceiling crises, our weaponization of the dollar against Russia, our dysfunction and division. And they made a choice. They chose an alternative. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of what's now being called the Shanghai Monetary Framework. China committed $2.1 trillion in currency swap agreements, creating a yuan liquidity pool that rivals the dollar. Japan announced a strategic diversification of its $1.1 trillion foreign reserves, reducing dollar holdings to below 50% for the first time ever. ASEAN nations collectively pledged $340 billion in local currency settlement mechanisms, bypassing the dollar for regional trade. This wasn't just a bad day for markets. This wasn't just a currency fluctuation. This was a structural transformation. This was a paradigm shift. And paradigm shifts are the one thing America has struggled to acknowledge since the end of the Cold War. For every sanction we have imposed, the world has built a workaround. For every dollar we have weaponized, the world has sought alternatives. For every threat we have made, the world has quietly prepared. And today that preparation went public. Remember, Washington thought China would never dare. They thought the global economy was too dependent on dollars. They thought our military dominance would deter any challenge. They thought our alliances were unbreakable. But tonight the exact opposite is happening. China dared. The global economy is rapidly diversifying. Military dominance means nothing when the battlefield is financial. And our alliances, the ones we took for granted, chose self-interest over loyalty. Ray Dalio has been warning about this since 2017. He wrote an entire book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. That predicted almost exactly what happened today. He showed how the Dutch guilder lost reserve currency status. He showed how the British pound lost reserve currency status. He showed how every reserve currency in history eventually loses that status. And he showed how America was following the same pattern. Nobody wanted to believe him. Tonight, everyone has to. What makes this moment so dangerous and so consequential is that China's latest move happened at a time when Xi Jinping is under immense domestic pressure. Economic reformers want faster growth. Military hardliners want confrontation with Taiwan. Provincial leaders want more autonomy. Citizens want jobs, housing, and opportunity. Xi is balancing these demands while managing the most significant restructuring of global finance in 80 years. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. Xi needed a win. He needed to demonstrate that China could challenge America and succeed. He needed to show domestic audiences that his vision of Chinese supremacy was achievable. And today he got that win. Today, the world watched as America stumbled and China executed. Today, Xi Jinping proved to 1.4 billion Chinese citizens that the American century is ending. And that makes him more dangerous, not less. Because now he believes his own propaganda. Now he believes America can be pushed. And now he's wondering what else he can take. The Treasury Department's statement, now circulating widely, was designed to signal that Washington is not willing to accept permanent damage to dollar hegemony. Officials said plainly that China's actions were inconsistent with the principles of free and fair international monetary cooperation. That is diplomatic language for China just declared economic war, and we have no idea what to do about it. You don't usually hear that tone from Treasury unless something serious is at stake. The Federal Reserve issued its own statement calling the situation fluid but manageable. That is central bank language for, we are terrified but cannot admit it publicly. The president, speaking briefly before boarding Marine One, said he had full confidence in American economic resilience. He did not take questions. He did not announce actions. He did not inspire confidence. And the markets responded accordingly. The Dow dropped 847 points. The S&P fell 3.2%. The Nasdaq cratered 4.1%. And gold, the ultimate safe haven, surged to $2,847 per ounce. Meanwhile, China's President Xi Jinping addressed the Politburo Standing Committee in a measured, confident speech tonight. He said, "Today marks the beginning of a new era in global finance. one where no single nation dictates terms to the rest of the world. He said, "The dollar's dominance was never permanent. It was a historical accident of the post-war order. That order is now ending." And he said, "China does not seek confrontation. We seek balance. We seek fairness. We seek a world where every nation has a voice in the monetary system that governs their fate." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leader who understands just how high the stakes have become and who believes he is winning. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. China's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the dollar dump, Russia announced it would begin pricing all energy exports to Asia in yuan and rubles, bypassing the dollar entirely. Saudi Arabia confirmed that a significant portion of future oil sales to China would be denominated in yuan, the long-feared petroyuan becoming reality. Brazil, South Africa, and Argentina announced they were actively considering joining the Shanghai Monetary Framework. All of this happened within the same 48 hours. When China moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. This isn't a reaction, this is a strategy. This is a plan that has been in development for years, possibly decades. And today, that plan went live. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that China is preparing for a confrontation over Taiwan and wants to insulate itself from dollar-based sanctions. Another is that China is attempting to create permanent leverage over American foreign policy by threatening dollar stability. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that China is attempting to build an entirely parallel financial system that will fragment the global economy into competing blocs. But today, America did not take that card off the table. Washington didn't rally allies. Washington didn't announce countermeasures. Washington didn't demonstrate strength. Washington demonstrated confusion. And confusion is weakness. And weakness is opportunity. And opportunity is exactly what Beijing was looking for. What we're watching now is a test of global economic order. China wants to see if America can still lead. America wants to show that it remains indispensable. Europe wants to prevent being caught in the middle. And the rest of the world wants to see who wins before choosing sides. This is not just about currency. This is about power. This is about who writes the rules for the next century. This is about whether democracy or autocracy shapes the future. And tonight, autocracy is ahead. As the week goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly China hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Ray Dalio's warning was timely. It forced markets to confront reality. It forced Washington to acknowledge the threat. And it forced Americans to understand that economic power is not permanent. It must be defended. What happens next will depend on what Washington does in the next 30 days. If they respond with weakness, this moment will be remembered as the beginning of the end of American economic supremacy. If they respond with strength, Beijing has already shown they are prepared for confrontation. America has shown before that it can rise to challenges. It has shown that it can adapt, evolve, and prevail. But it has never faced a challenge quite like this. A challenge that doesn't come with tanks or missiles. A challenge that comes with spreadsheets and currency swaps. A challenge that is quiet, patient, and devastating. And tonight, for the first time in decades, China appears to be setting the agenda. Beijing is quiet. Too quiet. And when China is quiet after a major move, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their next target carefully. Because tonight, Beijing learned something they have suspected for years. America can be challenged. The dollar can be threatened. And the world is ready for alternatives. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The post-war economic order is cracking. The dollar's throne is shaking. And America must decide whether to fight or fade. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.